Okay. I took a break and I made my decision. I'm not going to allow that evidence in. There's no evidence that it would only be admissible if Officer Potter was aware of these prior attempts to flee.
Well, later in the trial, I'll make an offer.
Okay. All right, can we bring the...
I do object to
Yes, I know you object to my ruling. Okay, can we bring the jury in? Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, please be seated. All right. Is there a cross?
Mr. Stoughton, I'm going to ask you some questions pertaining to your report and your testimony today. Let me get this right. What your last piece of testimony was that when the officers attempted to handcuff Mr. Wright because they had his address and name, and it was a minor violation, that they should have just let him go. Is that what you're saying?
No, that mischaracterizes my
Okay,
testimony and opinions.
What are you saying about it? I thought you said that they should let him go because they had his name and address. Is that what you said?
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, well then I misheard you. What did you say they should let him go?
No, I did not say they should
What
let
did
him
you
go.
say?
I said that the fact that they had identified him and had his address is a relevant consideration in balancing the threat of escape or evasion.
Of what? I'm sorry.
The threat of escape or evasion.
Okay, and if he attempted to escape, what should the officers have done?
Use reasonable force to prevent the escape.
And they do that when they were trying to stop him from escaping?
Are you asking me in
Yes.
this case? No.
They didn't. And
At an early point, I would say yes, although we didn't talk about that. But at the point of using deadly force, no. As I testified, that was excessive and unreasonable,
Right.
inappropriate, and inconsistent with generally accepted police practices.
yes, but I was not talking about deadly force. I was talking about your first opinion in your report about using the taser. And your report seemed to reflect that because they would find him some other time or somebody else would get him, that they should not have tried to stop him. Is that what your report says?
It's not, no.
Okay. Well, let's go back. You started working as a police officer in what year, 2001?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? And you worked as a police officer for 4 years and 7 months after that? Is that right?
Something like that, full-time, an additional 6 months as a reservist. The plaque on my wall says 5 years, but I'd have to calculate the exact number of months.
All right, well, let's assume it's 5 years, and it doesn't matter.
Sure.
That was 15 years ago, I believe, right? About that?
Yes. I left
And have you
about...
worked as a patrol officer since 15 years ago?
No.
And during the time you were a patrol officer, and we did some history here, how many first of all, do you know what a critical incident is?
Yes.
How many critical incidents did you have in the 5 years that you were a law enforcement officer?
Oh, I was involved in maybe a dozen.
Okay, name one. I'm talking about a critical incident where a gun was used.
Sure. So my first one was in field training. I was not a shooting officer. My field training officer.
Maybe you misunderstood me. I'm not talking field training. I'm talking out in the area, being a patrol officer and having a real life incident. Did you have any of those?
Your Honor, I hate to be the third person talking at a time, but could the court please remind Mr. Gray that only one person can talk at a time, we should let the witness.
Right, and if he could answer my question, Your Honor.
All right, okay. We may continue, but yet for the benefit of the court reporter, please remember not to talk over each other.
Okay.
All right.
So what I'm talking about is when real life, when you're out on a patrol alone and you have a critical incident situation, how many of those did you have?
I was involved in, although not the shooting officer, I was involved in perhaps a dozen or so.
Of an officer shooting?
Either an officer shooting, an officer potentially being shot at, a significant use of force that we would classify as a critical incident.
Were you ever the one that shot the gun?
No.
Were you ever the one that was shot at?
No.
Were you ever in a situation such as the one that you saw in this video, the chaotic incident of this sort?
Someone attempting to flee an arrest and traffic stop? Sure, a number of times.
Okay, well, did they have a bench warrant for a weapons violation?
I don't remember specifically. I know certainly there were people who fled who had outstanding warrants of different types.
Well, I'm talking about an incident. Did you ever chase somebody that had a weapons warrant?
I'm sorry, that had a weapons.
Well, okay. I'm talking about a critical incident where you were involved yourself personally, and a man broke away from you, didn't want to be handcuffed, and either drove off or ran off. Did you have any incidents like that?
I had a number of incidents where people who did not want to be arrested either drove off or ran off. They did not result in an officer-involved shooting, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so the person that drove off, if you can remember one specifically, did you have a person that drove off or that fought the handcuffs and jumped in the vehicle? That person had a warrant for a weapons violation, had no driver's license, no insurance, and a temporary restraining order against him against a female, and the officers did not know who the female was in the vehicle. Did you ever have an incident like that?
I can't say that I had that particular collection of facts as an officer, no.
Did your heart ever race, and did you ever get real excited when somebody left your custody and ran off?
Of course.
Okay. So you're aware that's what happens. Your adrenaline starts pumping. Is that right?
Colloquially, sure.
Okay. And you had that police officers patrol for about 5 years, give or take. And during the 5 years, you never was a trainer. You were a trainee except in computer training, correct?
I taught report writing to officers, the policies that we used. I got a number of different training.
You answered the question. You just answer my question, okay?
I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand your question.
I guess you don't. Okay, so during the time you were a police officer, you never was a trainer for use of force, for shooting a gun, or any kind of conflict with a citizen, correct? You weren't a trainer.
No, I earned a number of instructor certifications, including several in use of force disciplines.
You were a trainer for the officers back there in 2001, 2005. You trained other officers on the use of force. Are you testifying to that today?
No, I'm testifying that I earned several instructor certifications.
Did you hear my question? Did you ever train any officers back there when you were a patrol officer? Did you ever train any officers on the use of force? At the police department you were in?
At the police department, no, I was not what we consider to be a defensive tactics instructor.
And you were actually a trainee, correct?
At the beginning of my career, sure.
And as far as, do you remember what a spear drill is?
A spear, as in Tony Blauer's spear system?
I don't know, but in your records you didn't choose to participate in a spear drill. You remember that?
No, I don't. If that's the spear system drill, no,
Do you remember not participating in it?
I remember.
I can refresh your memory if you want.
Sure. I remember at one point getting a fever in the middle of defensive tactics training and getting pulled out.
And I'm going to object, Your Honor, on relevance grounds.
The objection is overruled.
Read it yourself.
Sure.
Sure what?
I've read it.
Okay. And what, does it refresh your memory?
Looks like my entire squad at the time is listed.
I asked you if it refreshes your memory or not. That's a yes or no, sir.
Not of this particular. I suppose it refreshes my memory as to what.
As to whether or not you wouldn't participate in the spear drill.
No, not
You don't
particularly.
remember? It did happen though, didn't it?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay. Too long ago? Is that right? Is it too long ago to remember?
Perhaps some combination of too long ago and simply not memorable.
And you probably don't remember a lot of things that you did as a patrol officer, is that right?
Oh, I'm sure there are all kinds of things that I've forgotten.
15 years ago?
Sure.
And when you were approached to work in this case, you signed a contract, correct?
Yes.
And the contract calls for, what was the hourly rate?
I believe it was $2.90 an hour with 10 hours on days of expected testimony.
Okay, and up till now, you've billed them about $10,000, would that be fair?
Something in that range, about 35 hours worth.
And since November, let's strike that. The cap on your contract is $50,000, correct?
I don't remember.
No, I'll show it to you.
Union approach.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Actually, totally, I believe it might be 95,000. Take a read on that paragraph and see what you can figure out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've misstated my rate. It's $2.95, not $2.90.
What else does that say?
It says quite a bit. What are you referring to?
The cap. How much is the cap?
The cap, I suppose if that's the total obligation clause, it will not exceed $95,000.
Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Bailey, did you remember to ask your questions at the podium for the benefit of the court reporter?
Now,
Was that spear drill late June?
I'm sorry I didn't ask you a question. The stop on this case last April 11th, you looked at that. That was legal, wasn't it?
The traffic stop itself? Yes.
And the arrest was legal, correct?
Yes, officers had probable cause to arrest for the bench warrant.
Well, besides the bench warrant, you knew that Wright did not have a license, correct? You learned that from this case, did you not?
Yes.
You learned that he didn't have car insurance, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you learned that the registration of the tabs on the car were old, outdated. You remember?
Expired, yes.
Yes. And you learned that there was a lady in the car also, and when they pulled up his record, he had a temporary restraining order in order for protection for some lady, correct?
Yes.
And the officers did not know at that time who the lady was in the car, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And then when they went up to arrest Mr. Wright, they had a special awareness, did they not, based on what you read, about a firearm being in that car, correct?
No, there were no specific and articulable facts that there was a firearm in the car.
Okay. But you as a patrol officer 15 years now, from 15 years ago, you would agree with me that there are many more weapons and firearms and cars and on person than there were 15 years ago. Do you agree with that?
I don't think there's any valid statistical evidence to support that.
And you as a patrol officer, now, 15 years later, it would not bother you a bit about a weapon and being in that car or being on his person, knowing that he had a weapons warrant against him. That wouldn't raise your suspicions or concern at all when you went back up to that car. Is that right?
That's not my testimony.
Well, would it raise your concern when you went back up to the car to arrest Mr. Wright that he had a weapons warrant outstanding, a bench warrant? He didn't show up. A judge ordered it. Would that raise your concerns about a weapon being in the car?
There is always...
That calls for a yes or no, by the way. Yes, it would raise my concerns, or no, it wouldn't.
I can't fairly answer the question with a yes or no.
Okay, well then don't answer it. So you can't answer that question because you don't know?
No, sir. I can't fairly answer the question with a yes or no.
All right. And the arrest of Mr. Wright at the car, when they got him out of the car, they said, "You're under arrest." All three said it, correct?
I know at least two of them said it.
Two said it, and Officer Lucky was trying to handcuff him, correct?
Yes.
And before Mr. Wright broke away from Officer Lucky, everything was according to protocol. They did everything correct, the officers. Am I right on that?
I would not describe it as the best tactical approach, no.
Okay. But there wasn't any unreasonable force involved, was there?
No, not at that point.
And you wouldn't describe it that way, but you haven't been a police officer for 15 years, have you?
That's about correct, yes.
Yes. So the arrest, the handcuffing of him was legal, correct? The attempt to handcuff him?
Yes.
Okay. And Wright's break away from that handcuffing, trying to get back in his car and actually getting back in it, that would be illegal, correct?
Yes.
The objection is overruled. The answer will stand.
And only as a result of what Mr. Wright did by doing that was what happened, and was chaos after that, correct? Would you agree chaos as far as the video that you saw?
I don't think it was only because of that, but certainly that was a predicate factor.
Well, Mr. Wright, he's the one that started it, correct? Nothing would have happened except for the fact that he broke away once he learned there was a warrant. Is that a fair statement?
Sure.
Okay. And do you agree that the video of the incident showed chaos? That it was very fast acting? I think it lasted, I can't remember here. Let's see, 5:19. About 30 seconds total from when he got out of the car. Is that correct?
Object, Your Honor, is going to ask the answer.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
So, do you remember that, or I'll ask you specifically? When Wright stepped out of the vehicle, it was 5 seconds between that time and the time he was told he was under arrest. Do you remember that?
That sounds about right.
And once he was told under arrest, 14 seconds later, and you remember in the video, that's when Officer Lucky was attempting to handcuff him. 14 seconds later, Wright pulled away and gets back in the driver's seat. Is that accurate about?
That sounds about right, yes.
And then 3 seconds after that, and if he tried to get back in the driver's seat, was trying to, 3 seconds after that, if you remember the video, Mrs. Potter went around to the left side and said, "I'll tase you." Remember that?
Yes.
And let me ask you a question. When somebody says, "I'll tase you," that's a warning to the person being arrested to stop or you'll get tased. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, the purpose of the warning is to generate compliance.
Yes. And in addition to that, when two officers, Johnson and Lucky, are wrestling with the guy, that's telling Mr. Wright that, hey, we don't want you to leave, we want you to be arrested. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think it would have been abundantly clear to someone in Mr. Wright's position that the officers were attempting to arrest him.
And would that raise your suspicion at all as to why in the world would this man, Mr. Wright, attempt to get away from 3 law enforcement officers?
As to the reasons for it?
Yes, besides the warrant.
Objection, speculation.
He's the expert, Judge.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
Would that go in your mind at all that this guy with 3 officers there, the one officer say, "I'll tase you," the other officer, Lucky, at first is wrestling with him and he doesn't stop? Would that cause you to be concerned that maybe he's wanted for something else?
Not unless
Wouldn't that be good
warrant
police
would...
work? I'm sorry.
Without the warrant showing up on a system, I would not be concerned that he was wanted for something else, no.
That wouldn't concern you, that a young guy is trying to get away from 3 officers, 2 officers, at least one, Officer Lucky, who you might remember if you saw the video, is a rather tall fellow, and Officer Potter are trying to stop him. He's wrestling with them, and Potter's saying, "I'll tase you." And nothing would enter your mind, I suppose because you haven't been a police officer in 15 years,
Object, Your Honor.
but would it enter your mind at all? Pardon?
Mr. Gray, if an objection is made, can you stop talking, please,
I'm
so I can
sorry.
rule on it? All right. The objection is overruled.
Thank you. So you've heard my description, and you're the use of force expert, the police procedure expert, correct?
Yes.
And would that raise any suspicion in your mind that maybe this kid's got some other issues? No?
The question you had asked originally was, would it raise a suspicion that he was wanted on something else? And without another outstanding warrant for him to be wanted on would appear in the system, the answer is no. Would it raise some speculative risk that there might be other things going on? Without specific and articulable facts, you have at best a risk. You have some speculation of possibility, but you don't have the sufficient basis for legal action. There's no threat, if you will.
I understand that, but it also causes the officers to have that suspicion. We got to stop this fellow. Maybe there's something else there that we don't know about. Another investigation, not a warrant, but he's being investigated for another serious felony.
Your Honor, I object. Can we be heard, please?
I'm going to sustain the objection, and the jury is to disregard that last question, and you are not permitted to answer.
Now, when you wrote your report, you assumed that Officer Johnson was not in the car at the time of the gunshot, correct?
I would say I concluded that rather than assumed it.
Okay, and you concluded it because you said that you couldn't see him in the car?
that on synchronized versions of the video, it was pretty clear that he was no longer in the car at the time of the gunshot.
Okay, so the car, the reason he got out of the car was because when Miss Potter said taser, 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 that would be a warning to the other two officers to release him, correct?
I can't speculate as to his motivation, but it's possible.
Well, is that the signal? If you're the taser man here, the expert, isn't that the signal? Taser, 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 to tell the officers to back off? We're going to shoot this electricity at them?
The warning of tasers has a couple of meanings, a couple of purposes.
Well, one of the
which-
purposes is taser, taser, taser tells the officers to get away from him because I'm going to tase him, correct?
I would say it tells officers to remove themselves from the taser target area.
Okay.
To
And,
office,
Again, court reasons, right?
well, Your Honor, if you would answer the questions yes or no, which I'm asking him like that, instead of giving me a statement afterwards, I would appreciate that he be instructed not to do that.
Still, again, one person at a time, okay?
All
You're
right.
going to have a really messy record if you don't comply with it.
Judge, I can't hear what you're saying.
I said one person talking at a time, okay? So don't talk over him, and wait until the question's finished before you answer.
yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Judge.
Yes.
Okay, so after Wright's told he's under arrest, my watching and reading of the reports and watching the video, 14 seconds later, Wright pulls away and gets back in the driver's side. Do you agree with that?
I apologize. Did you want me to answer the previous question about the taser, taser, taser?
I thought you did. I thought you agreed that it was a warning to the other officers to back off. You didn't say that?
No, not exactly.
Okay, well, what did you say? Go ahead.
It's a warning for officers to remove themselves from the target area. Officers are trained to apprehend someone who's under the influence of a taser. You can grab, for example, someone's arms even while they're being tased in the torso. So it's not a warning to absent themselves and move 5 feet away or something like that. It is a warning that the taser is going to be used. The other significant reason for that taser warning is so that officers don't confuse the pop of the compressed nitrogen for gunfire, so they don't mistake the taser discharge for gunfire.
Okay, and one of the reasons is that to back off the individual if they've got their arms on him when he's tased, to take their hands off of him because they might get a shock too, correct? Is that one of the reasons?
No, I would not say to take their hands off of someone because you often want to apprehend someone while they're being tased.
Okay.
So it's to warn them that a taser is about to be used. If their hands are on someone's torso, which is the typical target area, you certainly don't want to be in that area of effect, but it's not to back off of them entirely now.
All right. 3 seconds after Potter says, "I'll tase you," Kimberly Potter, first 5 seconds, Wright pulls away and Potter says, "I'll tase you," after 5 seconds. Now, on the video, after she said that at 2:01:55, did you see Mr. Wright at all say, "I give up," or "I won't fight anymore," or anything of that nature?
No, he was never compliant.
And that would be a warning that she was going to tase him, correct? If he didn't stop.
Her statement, "I'll tase you," is certainly a warning of an impending taser discharge, yes.
And if he would have stopped, you're assuming that the police officer wouldn't have tased him, correct?
Yes, that is a fair assumption.
And then at 3 seconds later, Mr. Wright, according to the video, is still fighting with the officers, and Potter says again, "I'll tase you." And did that affect Mr. Wright at all? Did he stop fighting at all when he said, when Ms. Potter said for the second time, I'll tase you.
No, he was never fully compliant.
He wasn't
after
compliant at
pulling-
all, was he? What do you mean fully compliant? He was fighting, wasn't he?
After pulling away from Officer Lucky, he was never compliant.
Before that? Okay. I
Before
see.
that, he was compliant. Yes,
Yeah.
he was not fully compliant throughout the
Well,
interaction. He was not compliant after the pulling away.
I'm asking you about during the time he wasn't compliant, sir. Can you understand that? You know what I'm talking about?
He was, I think so. He was not compliant in the time where he was not compliant.
And the warning, I'll tase you, the second warning, for 4 seconds he continued to fight with the officers, and the taser was pointed at him, according to the video, correct?
No,
No?
no taser was pointed at him.
You're right. The gun was pointed at him.
Yes.
Thank you. And by the way, the new taser, the 7, did you know that that taser and the one that Ms. Potter got a month before, a month before this, she got the new taser, Taser 7. Prior to that, she had a different taser. And the different taser had a yellow handle and a yellow top, where the new taser, the 7, had a black handle and a black top. Did you know that?
I believe there was...
Did you know that? That calls for a yes or no. Answer the question, yes or no, please.
I don't think that's an accurate description of the taser.
The taser that she had?
The X7.
I'm talking about, okay, the Taser 7, the top was black and the handle was black, correct? The rest of it was yellow. Fair statement?
There was... can you clarify what you mean by the top of the
Well,
taser?
where you got your handle here and right here was black from where the handle is over here.
Yeah, there's yellow on the sides of the part that protrudes from the thumb side of the hand in a grip, yes.
Yes, but the handle is black and the top is black, correct?
I believe that's correct.
And, well, you're the Taser expert, wouldn't you know that?
There are a number of different models of tasers still in use.
Did you know that the Taser that she had before this, 3 weeks before this, was all yellow? Did you know that?
That was the X26P, as I recall, and I believe the model, I don't remember the coloration of the model she had.
Okay, so you didn't know that. That's your answer, right?
I don't recall offhand. I can see if it's in my report if you'd like.
You also had in your report that Potter was not aware of Johnson being in the car. You remember that, writing that in the report?
That's a slightly inaccurate description of my report.
Well, you said that you couldn't. Well, what did you say?
I said the available evidence indicates that she was not aware of that.
Okay, and now the available evidence is that he was in the car, he testified he was in the car, and he was fighting with Mr. Wright before the shot. Did you read that testimony, or did you hear about it?
I heard the testimony, and that is consistent with the body camera video. He was in the car and struggling with Mr. Wright prior to the gunshot.
Okay, and it was a second prior to the gunshot, correct? The taser, and then the Potter fires a gun? 1 second or less.
Between
taser, and the gun being fired.
yes, by the end of that warning, it was a relatively short period of time, within
The
a
answer
second.
is yes. Would you answer my questions if you can with a yes or no? It'd be a lot easier.
Well, taser takes some time to say. By the time of the end of that warning, I agree, it was less than a second before the gunshot.
And that's when the officers took their hands off him, correct?
I'm sorry? No, the officers had their hands on him well before the gunshot.
Yes, but when did they take their hands off him? It was before the gunshot, wasn't it?
Sergeant Johnson took his hands off of Mr. Wright and backed out of the vehicle prior to the gunshot Officer Lucky had hands at least in the direction of Mr. Wright. I don't remember offhand if they were making contact at the time of the gunshot. It was immediately after the gunshot that Officer Lucky backed away.
Is your testimony that Mr. Johnson's part of his body was not still in the car?
I testified earlier that his hands were still in the car. He had backed his torso out of the vehicle. His hands were still in contact with either the passenger or perhaps Mr. Wright's right hand.
So he was in the passenger's doorway, and he's leaning over with his hands on Mr. Wright. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying he was backed out of the open front passenger door. His hands were either on the passenger or on Mr. Wright's right hand that was in front of the passenger.
Okay. Oh, that's what I thought he said. That's all right.
Members of the jury, I think we're overdue for a break, so we're going to take our afternoon break right now, and it'll be 20 minutes, okay? Thank you. Sorry. Okay, counsel, we're taking a break.